Absolutely not. Warrior is not the worst class in the game. So I've answered the clickbait title for you right off the bat. But Warrior does need some love because there are parts of it that are both a symptom of the game being in early access and one where we do not have the complete picture yet. While we do have 6 classes to choose from, Warrior does seem like it has the hardest time in the current state of the game because of a number of limiting factors that we'll go into. Now, like I said, Warrior is just fine. You can play and have a functional, awesome build. Titans have some wild DPS, and I've seen some amazing Warbringer Warcry builds where you just shout things to death like you're playing Skyrim. But outside of those more popular builds, Warrior has an identity problem. And in my typical fashion of upfronting the knowledge of my videos, let me go through all the points I'll expand on. Armor is probably the worst defensive mechanic right now because it doesn't mitigate enough damage for it to be worth it, and you'd need to stack an impossibly high number to even get it to a point where it can mitigate anything substantial. Warrior skills lack the complexity that we would otherwise have from other weapons being present in the game. Every other class is fine with their chosen weapon or the one they start with. But the Mace is not the best weapon, focusing almost entirely on physical and fire, 2 resistances that need significant penetration since they're resisted to so commonly. I think the addition of sword and axe, or with the addition of both those weapons, Warrior will become a very fun and interesting class that swaps from weapon to weapon to chase specific features such as bleed, more ignite, or whatever else we're getting with sword, what have you. Lastly, the build diversity on Warrior is just too low right now, and this is because of the amount of skills that are either not in the game or not fully fleshed out. For example, I went with a Warbringer, and a Warbringer totem gameplay just really can't come fully online because their ancestral spirit ancestry feels like it's just not complete, having poor scaling and what have you. But that's the too long didn't watch this entire video. So if I lured you in with clickbait and this was all you wanted to know, then please feel free to shut the video down and get back to enjoying your Warrior in Path of Exile 2. If you are heading out and this video does end up helping you, please don't forget to like, comment, or subscribe, as each one of those things helps me out in a huge way. You can quickly navigate to any part of the video that interests you the most using the chapters in both the timeline and the description. Lastly, don't forget to check me out on Twitch, where I stream this game every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Let's get started on Is Warrior the worst class in Path of Exile 2? So loading into the game, let's start off with a conversation about armor. And armor seems like it is a very accessible defensive mechanic. And, in part, it is, right? You're looking at this, just simply put on armor, and it's pretty high to get pretty high. It's pretty easy to get pretty large number. I have pretty low armor on all my items right now, but still, regardless, it is easy to get armor stats on your items pretty high because you're not trying to stack evasion and energy shield or what have you. But the problem with armor is how it really mitigates the damage. So this is the tooltip from the game, right? Armor reduces the physical damage you take from both attacks and spells, but provides no benefit against other damage types. Exact damage reduction depends on the damage dealt, but cannot be higher than 90%. Also further, armor reduces physical damage from hits. Damage reduction is proportional to the size of the hit and is more effective at reducing smaller hits. Now, if you've played this game for any extent of time and you've played into the end game, you know that the things that kill you are not small hits in rapid succession. It's one big random nuke that you weren't expecting, and it just takes you out, and you weren't expecting it, and boom, now you're dead. So that's the problem here. Yeah, sure, armor does a great job of mitigating damage against small little chips of health against you, right? But when you hit those really big boss battle level hits that wipe out chunks of health, your armor doesn't mitigate it as much. Now, I'm going to use an example here that Fervor Gaming gave me, and I'm going to link you to his YouTube channel. Fervor knows Path of Exile probably far more than I do. But his example here is, so let's say you have 20,000 armor, but you can even only ever mitigate like 2,000 damage or something like that. So for an endgame boss like Zesith, that is not enough to block half his damage. And furthermore, the biggest issue with all this is that you cannot even really easily, probably feasibly, attain 20,000 armor. So you won't even be able to mitigate 2,000 damage, which is not even half of what a typical endgame pinnacle boss's damage is going to be like. So this is the problem with armor. It is hard to tap into large amounts of it. It's hard for it to actually mitigate the hits you want it to truly mitigate. And you can see that it only mitigates physical damage from attacks or spells. It's not going to mitigate any of the specific, elements, fire, cold, lightning, chaos, what have you. Those are going to be from your actual resistances and what have you. But the biggest problem is that its accessibility pales in comparison to something like energy shield and or evasion. So taking a look at evasion here, I'll pop this one out and bring it out just so we can see. Evasion grants a chance to avoid enemy strikes or projectiles outright. Exact chance of success also depends on the attacker's accuracy. So you basically are going to get hit or you're not. So you have that with evasion, right? So that is its own kind of bag of missiles. Is that a saying that people say? Well, I'm going to do it today. I didn't mean for that to rhyme, but that's the only other time I'm going to do it. Now, energy shield on the other hand, which I would argue is the best of the three defenses, is just amazing. Protects your life by taking damage instead. Rapidly recharges if you don't lose energy shield for a short time. Chaos damage removes twice as much energy shield, and damage from bleeding and poison bypasses energy shield to remove life directly. Now, from the way I believe, or way I understand that last line, damage from bleeding and poison, you cannot be poisoned or bled if it does not do life damage to you. So, if your energy shield has to be drained in order for you to actually take bleed and poison damage. Your shield won't help you after that, but still, your shield's down, so it doesn't matter. So, the accessibility of energy shield from the passive tree is by and large way easier to get into than armor, and probably by and large easier than evasion, but still you can couple those together very easily. And in addition to that, getting something like 10,000 energy shield is really not the hardest task in the world. If I were to bring this up and close this, and remember too, your intelligence, taking a look over here, where is it? Intelligence is an attribute required to use most equipment that grants energy shield as well as various spells aligned with blah, blah, blah. It gives you +2 mana. Intelligence does not grant damage to skills and what have you. So intelligence gives you mana, and it's the easiest way to get access to energy shield items, right? Getting higher strength just gives you outright more health, which is cool and all. But taking a look at the passive tree, and it's hard to see in this thing, but if I just type in energy, which is probably energy shield, you can see there's tons of these nodes. And in the current iteration of the game, we have the monk that starts in this area, and then we have the sorceress and the witch that start in this area. So a lot of these nodes are easily accessible by classes that can leverage themselves into them and get the items to really have these things take off for you, right? Like I'm just going to use, for example, this one over here. I know this says evasion, but it's one that I know off the top of my head. 100% increased evasion rating from equipped body armor. So my monk has a 1500 evasion body armor, and that's doubled with this right here, right? So that's a ton more evasion, which is a pretty minimal investment if I'm playing as a monk, right? It's just right over here. Now, conversely, if I go over to this part of it and I type in armor, actually, I'll spell it right. There are quite a few nodes, but the problem is when it comes to choosing armor, and this is going to come into another issue when we talk about the lack of build diversity and the skill issue with the warrior, jumping into these armor nodes is also kind of a bit of a pain in the ass. You've got some really good ones, you know, like defend with 200% armor against critical hits. That's really helpful, right? Or you get stuff like this, 25% increased armor, 50% of base armor from equipment also added a stun threshold. So there's definitely ways to tap into really good armor nodes. I'm not saying that they don't exist, but I'm saying that by just looking over here, there's not that many to really leverage yourself into as a warrior to then coherently build your character. If you look at it, like a lot of the armor nodes are really right here. And if I look at where I'm going to really be spending a lot of my time, it's not as much. These over here are break armor nodes. So I guess I should probably, well, I don't know how I can really do that, but you can, even taking a look over here, this is where the druid and the Templar will be. There's not really a lot of armor nodes up there as well. And they're going to have energy shield and armor style of armor. So it'll be interesting because I just think that armor needs help. It doesn't mitigate enough damage. It's hard to get enough armor online to truly mitigate damage. You're better off just focusing on strength and having tons and tons of health. Maybe even jumping into intelligence and getting some energy shield on your build. I don't know. I can't figure it out. I'm playing a warrior, and I stopped playing warrior for a bit because I found out how goddamn fun monk is by comparison. Which brings me to my next point about warrior, is about those skills and that diversity. And actually, one thing too I forgot to talk about with energy shield real quick too, is that energy shield, as we saw, mitigates damage across the board. It's not only looking at physical. So, and it's a recharging resource. So you can have your health pool, which already exists, versus your health pool that already exists, and an energy shield. The energy shield's taking the damage, which is already then dealt with the mitigation through your resistances, and then it goes to your health. Versus armor is only going to help you with physical attacks that are going either through spell or attack, and then it's all going against your health pool. There's no kind of barrier of insulation like there is with a hyper invested energy shield user. So that is a big portion of it that I forgot to talk about, that I want to bring up here as a big downfall for armor. I think armor needs help with the way that it deals with mitigation, especially on those bigger, larger hits, because it is really just not as advantageous to focus solely on armor right now, and it's why Warrior's in kind of a funky spot. Skills for Warrior are relegated to Mace right now, right? Let's take a look just real quickly without even jumping through each and every one of these skills, because we're not going to do that. Let's look at crossbow. It's only missing 2 skills. Let's look at bow. It's really missing 3, but you can see how effective rangers have become. Look at elemental. It's not missing any skills. Look at quarterstaff. It's only missing 2 at the very end. Occult, it's not missing anything. So of the 6 classes that are available to us right now, Mace has the most skills missing, at 4 skills missing across a pretty wide range here. This is tier 5, 7, 9, and then 13. I don't know what you want to call that. So that's a pretty wide scope of skills versus like you look at quarterstaff, it's only the latter 2. You've probably made your build by the most part by the time you get here. Or bow, really, again, it's really the latter 2 with just this one right there. So you can see you've probably got a lot more coherency built across your build by the time you get to those ones that are missing. Mace, on the other hand, as soon as you jump into 5, you're already missing something that could maybe jump into a different war cry, a different totem. That's probably what it is, because we have Shockwave Totem up here, and then Ancestral Warrior Totem down here. More on totems in a little bit. But what's the issue with this is that none of this really feels as cohesive when we're taking a look at how the skills perform compared to the ones that we have access to. Quarterstaff skills are badass. The monk is so strong, and it's so damn good. You have tons of different tools in your kit with all the elemental skills. The occult stuff is pretty fun. You have your really cool ascendancies. You've got your bow and you've got your crossbow. We've seen how the mercenary and the ranger have been really great at doing lots of really fun DPS. But when it comes to Mace, you're relegated to very specific builds that use very specific things. Almost everyone's talking about using Perfect Strike. A lot of people are talking about using Hammer of the Gods. A lot of people use Stampede. Pretty much everyone uses a lot of the same things because everything doesn't quite feel like it should. It feels like there's something missing to turn on the other abilities. And that's something that I've experienced here, trying to do kind of like a off the beaten path type of build, focusing on Shockwave Totem and Earthquake, which are cool mechanics, but again, they don't feel like they're coming off the ground 100%. And I think the part of that is that I think of all the classes, right now, it's kind of funky to switch between weapons because weapon swapping has an animation, and then you do the animation for the skill. I think of a game like Throne and Liberty, which has a very fluid, quick, and fast way to swap weapons in the middle of skills, so you never feel penalized for using cross-weapon skills. Whereas this game feels, and maybe this is an attack speed issue, and I haven't played enough with attack speed, so feel free to correct me in the comments below, as always, guys. But when I try to juggle 2 different weapons, even 2 of the same weapons with different alignments or ailment alignments, I find that it just takes so long to do it that my character actually puts himself in harm's way. Especially, prior to the Rolling Slam buff, which made it so that it actually is a faster animation, I was using this as a 2-handed weapon and then using a 1-handed weapon and a shield, or 2 weapons for all my other stuff. And just swapping to this just made the windup that much slower. So either it's an actual attack speed issue, it's some sort of animation issue locked to the frames that are attached to every single skill and the way that you swap weapons. But I'm hoping that when we jump into getting access to the axe, which would be our other strength weapon, and our sword, which would be a other strength and dexterity weapon, we get a character that can fluidly move between 2 to 3 different weapons in a very fun and cohesive way. Even Flail, which will eventually be a strength and intelligence weapon, that again opens up a different avenue for us. And I think that the warrior feels so pigeonholed into a weapon that A, feels incomplete, B, doesn't feel like it has a lot of really fun options or good builds, And C doesn't really feel like it can compete with the other ones because it's locked to just physical and fire damage. If I look at the quarterstaff, we have lightning, we have physical, and we have, what's that other element? I'm looking right at it. It's called cold. There it is. Bow has access to fire. It has access to chaos damage via poison, it has access to lightning, and it has access to cold. Crossbow has just fucking everything under the hood. And then same thing with elemental, right? Like you just have access to quite a wide range. And occult has access to tons of stuff when it comes to summoning things and curses as well as chaos damage, right? I'll be honest, it's the one I have not played. But with all that being said, you just don't have enough tools in your arsenal as Mace. Another symptom of this, though, is the fact that we're only looking for acts 1 to 3. Of course, we have the end game. The end game is going to be its whole different beast. I've played that on my monk plenty, and I do know that you are dealing with lots of different resistances. But we're talking about looking at the campaign from acts 1 to 3, then cruel 1 to 3 again. You're dealing with the same sets of resistances, and you deal with tons of fire and physical resist in act 2 and quite a bit of fire in act 3. Hopefully when we get acts 4, 5, and 6, that'll be a different thing. It'll kind of flop itself on its head, and you'll deal with less fire and cold, or I'm sorry, fire and physical, and more cold and lightning in the latter 3 acts. But we'll have to see when that game launches what that looks like. But I think up until that point, once we get Marauder, once we get Duelist, the warrior will inherently feel better. And I think it's also a symptom too of the way that melee feels, but that's a wider conversation. So we've talked about our skills, we've talked about armor. Let's now talk about our build diversity and really how the ascendancies work when it comes to warrior. So build diversity for warrior is pretty low right now. I think majority of people go Titan. I went with Warbringer because I really wanted to basically make an enhancement shaman. Or originally the genesis here was to make some sort of Death Knight type of build focusing on minions, and I thought the Warbringer would be the closest thing to it, and I could try to do stuff with totems. That didn't work out. Well, this guy, for one, Ancestral Spirits, this is not a good ability right now. So modifier, so basically what happens here is each of your totems will summon an Ancestral Spirit minion to fight for you. If the totem that summoned the minion dies, then the Ancestral Spirit will too. The minion's pretty cool in that you've got, I think it's like 4 different ones. You have a turtle that will give you an AoE buff, defensive buff. You have a guy who sounds a horn, which does an AoE damage buff. You have, I think it's a big ape who charges and throws a ton of stun threshold out. And then you have someone who basically casts a bunch of whirlwind abilities. So they're cool, but they really don't do very good damage. And they don't really help you as the character to push any real damage on even just the campaign, let alone maps. So Ancestral Spirits in and of itself is not complete. And I think that a lot of people have called this, have said like, hey, it just doesn't feel like it's fully integrated into the game yet. You can't scale it with anything. You can put support gems into it. It doesn't do anything. There's no way to scale what these spirits do. Modifiers to totem's life also affect minions from this skill. It doesn't do much. You could jack tons of life into it, but they don't do more damage or anything like that. So right now, Ancestral Spirits, which is the largest or one of the biggest portions of going with a totem-focused Warbringer, just doesn't work. It's cool that it triggers off of things, and you can maybe do stuff with triggering when it comes to the passives, but to get these as permanent minions, you'd have to get this ability right here, Ancestral Bond. A limited number of summoned totems. Totems reserve 100 spirit each. So you can summon them up and they become permanent, right? Cool, but now the problem is that they reserve spirit, so that's hard to tap into as a warrior. And 2, the spirits themselves aren't, the ancestral spirits aren't really doing much for you to really warrant going so far off the beaten path to get to it. You'd have to get that one, the one necklace thing that allows you to tap into a keystone of your choosing, not to confuse with Keystone Light, because I've drank too much of that shit in my life. And our last ability here, and I'm talking about totems because this is an example of something that is lowering build diversity. 20% of damage from hits is taken from your nearest totem's life before you. That doesn't really do much for me because the totems aren't there for long enough. And B, the totems are a vehicle for my damage if I'm focusing on it, because you need to focus on the totem clusters. There's a totem cluster here. There's one right here. Another one right here. There's one way up here. And then there's 2 more down here. Maybe just this one. Yeah, just these 2. I got these 2 confused. But this is how you get additional totems from these totem clusters. They're pretty crucial And they give you tons of stuff like this one right here that gives you a 25% increased damage. So losing a totem because the damage gets put to the totem sucks because you've put so many quote unquote eggs in a basket. So there's that problem with that. So the result is that for Warbringer, really the only reliable builds that you can go with are some sort of armor break through this column, and then some sort of Warcry. Those are the most reliable builds when it comes to this character. Now, if you're going with Titan, Titan does have really cool Hammer of the God builds, and you can do really cool stuff with like Jagged Ground and blowing stuff up with that. But what happens here is you have a class that feels like it's pigeonholed into only set builds because the other things just aren't present in the game enough for the warrior to feel like it can really, you know, quote unquote, flex its muscles. You can be a lightning ranger. You can be a poison ranger. You can be a mercenary that summons turrets. You can be a mercenary that specializes in grenades. You can be a super duper damage dealing mercenary that goes witch hunter. You can be a monk that focuses on cold, one that focuses on lightning, one that does both. You can do any kind of element for sorceress. You can go wherever you want with witch. Again, I don't really have tons of witch experience, so that's why I threw that throwaway sentence into that. But for warrior, you're relegated to very simple ways to play. And also, you're ultimately stuck with getting this. You can wield two-handed axes, maces, and swords in one hand, triple attribute requirement of weapons. This is such a needed ability because you need the defensive stats from this. If you're gonna go with a warrior, you need to stack 75% block chance, because block is the only other way we can mitigate damage outside of armor, right? Chance to block. Incoming strikes and projectiles causing them to deal 0 damage. Some larger and more dangerous enemies, attacks cannot be blocked. So you need to get this online because this is the only way you're going to mitigate additional damage as a warrior. So you're pigeonholed into this. And triple attribute requirements of weapons is rough. This character is 45. I had to get this because I was just getting dumpstered so quickly because I went with Warbringer and so on and so forth in the way I wanted to build my character. You can say all the things you want about skill issue. I suck at this game. But my point remains, tripling this, it forces you to look for weapons that have reduced attribute requirements because it's the only way to get them active. So this is rough. This used to only be 2x. Now it's 3x. I think if this was changed to 2.25 or 2.5x attribute requirements, it would unlock things a little bit easier for us as fledgling warriors coming into the end game. But also, you have to get this, like I said, and you then have to focus on this. 1% increased damage per 1% chance to block. Now, I don't know if this damage is capped at your block percent chance percent block cap, which is 75%. So I think if you have more than 75% block, even though the game gives you a cap at 75%, you can still go higher, I think, and still get damage bonus off of this. So you need these two notables. This comes back to my previous statement about it's harder then to get access to armor nodes. These are all break armor, by the way. These are all break armor again. Here's an armor cluster. Here's an armor cluster. And there's an armor cluster that you can reliably get to. And this one down here, I suppose. Reliably get to en route to getting this and en route to getting this. After, you also need this one too, because 1% increased damage per 15 strength. Because you are only focusing on strength because you're only trying to get that. Everything else outside of that, you now need to start picking up offensive nodes, or else your character starts to get pigeonholed into being too defensive. I said pigeonholed so many times this goddamn video. So this, I think, kind of paints a picture that, yes, the warrior is good. It's awesome. I have so much fun with warrior. Unfortunately, I do have way more fun as monk because of the speed and cracked out playstyle of monk. I think fits who I like or what I like more out of video games nowadays. So that's a personal preference. But warrior feels like it cannot do the just compounding levels of damage that it can get on so many other classes easily. Yes, it can be done. Yes, I've seen awesome builds. I've seen people that have made comments about really cool ways that they've stacked bleed and all these cool things into their totems to get all these really cool abilities, but you really got to know the game to do it. And that's fine. You know, that's a skill issue type of thing, right? You learn the game, you learn how to play something really well, and you do it. I'm not saying that I want warrior to be this easy, brain dead class that just simply clicks and wins. I'm saying that the issues with the class are more inherently built into the fact that the game's in early access, the axe, the sword, all the skills, all that stuff is not present in the game. Once we get those things, I think all these pain points, they get swept away pretty quickly. And I think the only one thing from this video that is a true mechanical problem with the warrior that that I think needs to be addressed is armor and the way that it does damage mitigation. Everything else, like I said, it's either coming to the game, it looks like it's not fully implemented, or it's just, you know, hey, once we get those other items, it'll be just fine. So that's my overall take on things. It's the first class I played. It's the one I liked the most, probably from on paper, but it's not the one that I enjoy playing the most right now because everything else just feels so much tighter as a character. It feels so much more easily accessible to do gross amounts of damage or pivot into different portions of defense. And this is something I forgot to bring up just a little bit ago. The warrior is the only class that I've played where I feel like I'm constantly retooling my build. I'm constantly having to buy and upgrade my items because every single time I jump to a new map, that map is that much harder for me, that progression of monster level, right? Whereas Ranger, Monk, Mercenary, I felt like I'm just blitzing through the game. So that's been my biggest thing here with the warrior. And this is a sentiment that's been echoed online and through a lot of other people. Again, I talked to Fervor Gaming about it, and he has a real badass war cry warbringer that he's been doing, and it's performing very well, very, very well. I think his character is like 86. Is he on right now? He is, but he's on his blood mage. But warrior can be great in really great circumstances. I'm just saying I need it to be great across more build diversity so we can have more fun with this class. But go ahead and let me know in the comment section below. Do you agree? Do you think the warrior is in a funky spot? Or do I really just suck that much at warrior and I need to do these things to get better at it? I'm open to it. I think everyone is at a point in the game, you know, we're a month into this now. We're all learning things that now actually work a little bit better. We're kind of falling into not necessarily a meta, but we're falling into an understanding of the way things probably shake out for characters, for skills, and for how mechanics are actually working. And expect all that to shift in the next month or two once they release balance patches and what have you. But definitely think that the warrior does need some love. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.